October has arrived. It is now officially spooky season. And I got some spooky book recommendations for you guys today. 10 spooky books, ordered from least spooky and scary and disturbing to most spooky and scary and disturbing. So that way, all of you guys who read books but maybe don't like to be too scared, there will be something for you as well. Let's get right to it. First, we have Tales from the Gas Station by Jack Townsend. Perhaps the weirdest series I have ever read. These 4 books take place in the weirdest small town in the world. And in this small town, there is a gas station that is the nexus for all these weird things. There is a cult that lives in the woods with a mysterious founder. There's mutant raccoons. There's the ghost of a cowboy in the bathroom. And we have Jack, our lonely gas station clerk, who has a case of terminal insomnia, and he's slowly losing his mind throughout the series. This quartet, is a fever dream. I had no idea what was happening throughout, and it's basically a 4-book long creepypasta. It's very episodic in nature. I love the characters, I love the funny dialogue, there's lots of inside jokes and references to popular culture. So safe to say, this series does not take itself too seriously. That being said, the stakes are high. Things happen, bad things happen, irreversible things happen, and there's a creepy undertone throughout the entire series. Some scenes are disturbing, some scenes are scary, but I think even if you are not a fan of horror, but you have a high tolerance for the unknown, I think you will find a lot of enjoyment. I loved this quartet. I read it in about 4 months, which is very rare for me. I have a hard time focusing on one series, but I had to know how this story ended. Even if you are not a fan of horror, but you just want some horror light, something suspenseful, something thrilling, something weird, I think you'll like Tales from the Gas Station. And next, we have Nothing But Blackened Teeth by Cassandra Khaw. Cassandra Khaw is an author that I never talk about, even though I've read about 10 of her works. Nothing But Blackened Teeth is a horror novella that takes place in an old haunted house in Japan. It is a bachelorette party gone wrong. A bunch of friends meet together for perhaps one last time to celebrate 2 of their friends getting married. Drama ensues, ghost attack. There's a very humorous tone to this horror story, but there are some very creepy moments as well. I thought the primary antagonist force was very scary, very disturbing. The audiobook production of the story, particularly, is quite good. So if you like Japanese folklore, you like people in their early 20s transitioning from the previous stage of their life to the next stage of their life, I think you'll find a lot of the angst and drama and dialogue very relatable. If you've been to bachelor or bachelorette parties that have gone wrong, like I have, I think you'll have a good time with this novella. You'll read it in perhaps 3 or 4 hours, and I found the conclusion to be very interesting, and I think about it often. Next, we have Night of the Mannequins by Stephen Graham Jones. This one is a thinker. It blurs the line between supernatural horror and psychological thriller. It is a nice coming-of-age story about a young man who suspects that his friends are being hunted down by a sentient mannequin. This is a slasher story. There's lots of violence, there's lots of action, lots of thrilling moments, not particularly horrifying. Actually, I found many of the violent scenes to be quite humorous. That's kind of the slasher vibe. Violence and humor. And Night of the Mannequin does a very good job at walking that tightrope because there's tension throughout, but there's nice scenes where there's like some humorous moments that help lighten the mood so that way the tension doesn't become uncomfortable. This one will make you think. I found the conclusion very interesting. It's a little ambiguous, a little open-ended, and I love that. I love a story where you can read it, and upon completion, you could talk to other people that read it, and you will all have different opinions. I thought this one was quite interesting. I've read 2 or 3 of Stephen Graham Jones's works, and this is the only one I enjoyed. Night of the Mannequins is a fun time, also very short. You could read it in a weekend. Book number 4 is near and dear to my heart. Fun fact, when my wife was in labor for our first child, I was reading this book aloud to her to pass the time, and I'm talking about The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. This book is not horror, it is terror. There's a distinction. Horror is the knee-jerk reaction you feel to something terrifying happening. It's when you flinch, it's when you jump. But terror is atmospheric. Terror is the tension that builds. Terror is your body preparing to be uncomfortable. And The Haunting of Hill House is constantly building in tension. You are uncomfortable throughout the entire story. You're not sure what is happening. There's some psychological things happening. Perhaps there's some supernatural things happening. And every line of dialogue, every description of the scenes, everything that happens will make the reader more and more uncomfortable. If you watch a TV show, the TV show is not very much not like the books. The TV show was actually scary. The book is just uncomfortable. Shirley Jackson can write amazingly. I'm surprised I've not read anything else from her because I love this book so much. I love the ending. It's also ambiguous. That's going to be a theme for many of these books. There's a lot of ambiguous endings, ambiguous moments. And I think the ambiguous nature of this book is one of the reasons why it is so timeless. One of the original haunting house stories, and Shirley Jackson pulled it off masterfully. What a beautiful book. And yeah, it's part of the lore of my life. Book number 5 is a hidden gem. I've never heard anyone talk about this book on BookTube, but let me tell you, it is one of the most wild fever dreams of a story, and I think about it often, and I am talking about Fiend by Peter Stenson. This is a zombie apocalypse story. I love zombie stories. But what is the twist with Fiend? Well, all the survivors that we follow in this story are meth addicts. I'm not sure how familiar you are with meth, but it leads to a lot of erratic behavior. It leads to a lot of unhealthy psychological coping mechanisms. And so when you're following a cast of characters who are all dealing with meth addiction, and they are in a world that is being taken over by the undead, wild, obscene, terrifying, disturbing things happen. Because addicts oftentimes destroy the lives of those around them. And zombies very literally destroy the lives of those around them. So there's all these antagonistic forces in Fiend that'll make you uncomfortable, that'll disturb you even. And the ending, not very ambiguous, but the ending, oh, it had me on the edge of my seat. There are character deaths in Fiend that I still dwell on, that I still ponder about. And if you have anyone in your life that you knew personally that has dealt with drug addiction, this book will hit particularly hard. I grew up in Las Vegas. There's lots of drug addiction here, and a lot of the people in this book were super familiar. So if you're looking for a story that'll make you cringe, that'll make you squirm, that'll make you uncomfortable, that'll make you think, and perhaps feel some more empathy for people that are dealing with mental illness, you can't go wrong with Fiend. It's a hidden gem, and more people should be reading this. The next book on the list is a classic. It's an oldie. It came out in 1974, over 50 years ago at this point. It is disturbing. The pacing is breakneck, and this book made me very uncomfortable, and I'm talking about The Rats by James Herbert. James Herbert is not talked about a lot in the modern online bookish communities, and that's a damn shame because he wrote action-packed, fast-paced thrillers that'll make you uncomfortable. The character work, not the best, but you don't need to focus on the characters because what is happening in this book will make you uncomfortable. It'll make you emotionally invested instantly. London has been stricken with a plague of giant mutated rats that swarm people and devour them and tear them apart. I've been around rats and mice my entire lives. We had dozens of snakes growing up. We were always feeding rodents to our snakes. I've always recoiled at rodents. I'm very uncomfortable with them. So when I read this book, I think 5 years ago, and the depictions of these rats just swarming people and taking them out was just very disturbing. very unsettling. There are some scenes in this book that made me so uncomfortable, that made me feel like there was something crawling on my shoulder, and it's just icky. But it's icky in a good way. I love the adventure. I love watching these humans try to overcome the plague. Lives are lost, and I found the climax to be very satisfying. This book is the first in a trilogy, but I think this book works very well as a standalone. I think if you're a fan of Stephen King's more violent earlier works, perhaps his Richard Bachman books, I think you'll really enjoy The Rats. It's a classic, and it's being forgotten, and that's a damn shame. Next, we have Revival by Stephen King. Stephen King doesn't really write horror novels anymore. He hasn't been a horror author for like the last 20 years. But Revival, which he wrote about 10 years ago, is a true return to form. This book is gritty, it is disturbing, it is raw and emotional. The antagonists and protagonists are amazingly well fleshed out, and they don't outshine each other. The dynamic between those two main characters in the narrative was pulled off and written so well. The climax and falling action were masterful. One of the best endings I've ever read from Stephen King. He has a well-earned reputation for having endings that kind of fizzle out, but Revival does not suffer from that whatsoever. This is very much a love letter to many of Stephen King's favorite authors and influences. It's a love letter to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, to Shirley Jackson's other works. Stephen King really pulled out all the stops with this book. It is relatively, untalked about compared to a lot of Stephen King's other popular horror works, but I feel like it's one of Stephen King's best novels. I've read about 20 of them, and this is definitely in the top 5. Stephen King found a way to use the old school horror trope of bringing someone back from the dead. He put a modern twist on it. There's some Dark Tower, references, some interdimensional Stephen King multiverse references that make this book, satisfying and interesting to people who read a lot of other Stephen King's works. Next, we have a psychological thriller that had me on the edge of my seat. A book very disturbing, a book I think about often, but I never see mentioned here on BookTube. And I'm talking about Red Dragon by Thomas Harris, the first installment in his Hannibal Lecter series, but this can be read as a standalone. We follow a detective, an investigator who is hunting down a serial killer who has done a series of ritualistic murders, a serial killer known as the Tooth Fairy. We follow this investigator on his journey in an epic game of cat and mouse. But what makes this investigator special? He has the gift of perfect empathy. He could put himself in the shoes. He could see things from the point of view of the monsters he hunts down. So these cases where he's chasing down these killers are very draining, very difficult for him. But he's one of the best at his job, which is why he's come out of retirement to hunt down the Tooth Fairy. It also introduces Hannibal Lecter, but he's not very present in this book. I found myself rooting for the antagonist at times. And that sounds bad because I just explained how he's a serial killer and he's terrifying. But a lot of this book is told from the point of view of the Tooth Fairy, of the bad guy. And we get some information. We get some of his lore that led to him becoming this monster that he is. And you see where he came from. You see how his upbringing was. And you can't help but connect the dots and be like, yeah, that makes sense. You feel empathy for the bad guy, and you feel empathy for the good guy, which makes this book very easily to get emotionally invested in. I found myself rooting for the bad guy. I wanted this book to end on a happy note. But in a story like this, there is no happiness. There is only pain and disturbing moments and tragedy. I loved Red Dragon. I never felt the need to move on with the series, but maybe I will because I love Red Dragon so much. I love the antagonist. I love the psychological thriller aspects of it. I love the inner monologue of both the protagonist and the antagonist. This book is disturbing, and I think if you're looking for something that'll make you uncomfortable, that'll make you ponder about things, I think you'll really enjoy Red Dragon by Thomas Harris. There are trigger warnings, though. Next, we have Cold Moon Over Babylon by Michael McDowell. Michael McDowell wrote my favorite book of all time, Blackwater. And Cold Moon Over Babylon is nothing like Blackwater, but it is another Southern Gothic masterpiece. This book is quite short, under 300 pages, and it takes place in the small town of Babylon, Florida. And it is a small southern town with rivers and lakes around it, very swampy, gross weather. And in this small town, tragedy has struck. A young girl was murdered, and we're not sure why. We don't know who did it. And there are some supernatural elements in the story that I don't want to talk about because that will get into spoilers. But they are there to try to balance out the tragedy that has struck. We follow the story from the point of view primarily from the family of this little girl, and at times from the antagonist. And this antagonist is despicable. He is disturbing, and you'll be rooting for his demise. You'll be rooting for him to be brought to justice throughout the entire narrative. And I loved what was happening in this book. The tragedy was very sombering. It made me very uncomfortable. The things that are revealed about this young girl in the last few months of her life before her demise, it really will tug at your heartstrings, especially if you have children of your own. Cold Moon Over Babylon is a very satisfying horror read. That's the way I would put it. It is very satisfying. It is not ambiguous whatsoever, unlike many of the other books on this list. Michael McDowell, besides Blackwater and Beetlejuice, because he wrote the script for Beetlejuice, you don't really hear much about him. And that's a damn shame because he is a master of his craft. There's a reason why Stephen King called Michael McDowell the greatest writer of paperback originals in America. That is high praise indeed. Definitely pick up Cold Moon Over Babylon. It is a hidden gem, and it deserves more eyes on it. Next, we have a book that needs no introduction. Everyone has heard about this book at this point, and I was very much late to the party. I read it a few weeks ago. It is the internet's favorite work of horror of the last 10 years or so. And of course, I'm talking about Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman. This book takes place during the Black Death, which by itself is horrifying enough. A plague that killed anywhere between a third and half of the population of Europe. It was truly an apocalyptic event. But that's not all that's happening in this book. There is also an epic struggle between good and evil, between devils and angels, that is happening on the cosmic level of this story. We follow a disgraced knight, an alcoholic priest, and a young girl who may be a saint, who may be touched and protected and guided by the divine, but we're not quite sure. Perhaps he's a witch, perhaps he's an angel. We figure out this epic struggle between good and evil, between devils and angels, had me on the edge of my seat. Between Two Fires is very episodic. I feel like the author did us a great service by making this a standalone work because he could have easily stretched this book into a series, and I would have read it. The story was that good. I love the characterization. I love the dialogue. I love Tomas, our disgraced knight. I loved the character arcs of our characters. I loved the themes that center around faith and sacrifice and redemption and atonement. Lots of biblical themes in this book, but they are tackled in a way that is very approachable, not preachy. And this book is very much a modern story set in a medieval setting. It's Constantine meets The Stand. And I thought it was pulled off perfectly. I love the climax and falling action. There are sombering, harrowing character deaths that brought a lot of emotion. This book is brutal. It is disturbing. It has all of the trigger warnings, but it was all worth it. I found the ending quite cathartic, quite moving, quite thought-provoking. This was truly a harrowing read, but it was worth it. One of the best books I've read in 2025. I have a vlog about it. I'll put it somewhere on the screen. If you were like me and you have been procrastinating picking up Between Two Fires, October 2025 is the time to read this book. It is worth it. Give in to the FOMO, give in to the peer pressure. A lot of times the most popular books aren't the greatest books, but when it comes to horror, there are a few horror books that can compete with Between Two Fires. It is that good. So there you have it. 10 spooky book recommendations for your spooky season. I think these books will put you into the October Halloween vibe, and I recommend them all highly. What spooky books would you recommend to me to read for this spooky season? I'm all ears. I love to hear what you guys have to say. Thank you guys for watching this video, and I'll talk to you guys next time.